Okay, hey everybody, my name is Ted Metz. I'm a sculptor in Alabama, and I've got the task right now of recycling 2,000 pounds of oil-based clay. Sometimes people call it Plasticine or Plasticine. I think those names, I may be wrong here, but I think those names are kind of like tissue and Kleenex. It's basically all oil-based clay. Different manufacturers and distributors are going to have different brand names for it. But my good friend and colleague, Nelson Grice, is running the camera, and we're going to talk about how we recycle oil-based clay. Grice, G-R-I-C-E, look him up, he's a kick-ass sculptor. Look at Ted Metz too. Right. So 20 years ago I made a sculpture for the university that I recently retired from. And in that sculpture, it's a bronze sculpture, and I used 2,000 pounds of oil-based clay. And it's been stored in boxes in a variety of studios and weather conditions for over 20 years. And this is what one of the boxes of maybe 30 look like. So you can see time has got to it, mice have got to it, rotten cardboard has gotten to it. And when you open these things up, this is kind of what you find. So I've got some plaster remaining in this clay. Got a bunch of mouse turds and presumably mouse piss right here, which turned into mold, I guess. There's some cardboard there. There's some grinding shavings and sawdust all here. And we're going to take this stuff, which looks very toxic now, and I don't even want to touch it, certainly don't want to use it. But we're going to recycle this stuff or recondition this stuff and filter out all the crap. And we're going to end up with slabs of clay like this. Now, when I bought this clay, and typically when you do buy clay, you're going to get a big brick of it. I think when I bought clay 20 years ago, it might have been in slabs, maybe 12 by 12 by 2 or 3 inches thick, which is very difficult to deal with because you've got to warm all this clay up, you've got to cut it up, you've got to figure out how to manipulate it. So when I'm going to recondition this thick stuff, I'm going to pour it into thinner slabs. It's going to be much easier to warm up and much easier to use. Okay? So in order to do this, we need a few things, very simple tools. First of all, we need something to warm up or melt the oil-based clay in. And this is a thrift store find for 15 bucks, these 18-quart roasters or cookers or whatever. Depending on how much clay you're recycling or reconditioning, it depends on the scale of the warming container here. I mean, if you have a little bit to do, you could use a crock pot or something like that. But do not use open flame. Do not do this in the house. Do not do this in your oven or on your stove top. You're going to end up stinking up your whole place or catching your house on fire. So this has to be one of these kinds of ovens where it's gentle, warm heat that will melt the materials. So we're going to heat up the material in this little oven thing here, whatever it's called, roasting pan. We're going to pour it into cookie sheets, and this is just a 10 by 15 standard cookie sheet with that non-stick surface on it. These things work great. They're inexpensive and they're great for recycling oil-based clay or wax. We're going to need a sieve. We'll talk about this a little more in detail in a moment. We're going to need a spatula to run the material through the sieve. You're going to need a putty knife. And my experience with tools is if you ever need one putty knife to do something, you always want to have two because you're going to end up scraping one putty knife with the other to clean it up. You're going to need a dust mask to wear while you're recycling this stuff. You're going to need some kind of a container to put trash that you're going to filter out of the clay. You notice in the background here I've got a fan. We are outside, you might understand, but I keep a fan on here to blow and across this oven, so I'm not dealing with inhaling all these fumes from this oil-based clay. And then ultimately at the end, when you want to clean up your hands and get rid of the greasy surfaces on your body, Dawn's liquid detergent is absolutely the best soap, in my experience, from getting off oil. It's but one of the products they use when waterfowl get caught up in oil spills and they clean the birds with Dawn. Probably other stuff too, but Dawn is a good one. So, the sieve. The sieve is really very important. This is a sieve that I happen to have, and it is all screen wire is gauged by, it's called a mesh, and the mesh has a number associated with it. So the higher the number, the finer the mesh. Now this happens to be a 10 mesh stainless steel screen that fits into this ring. And this mesh, number 10 mesh, gives you about a 1/16 hole between the grid of the screen. And for my purposes, this is working really well to blend this clay, to get small impurities out of it that are going to sit on the top surface of this sieve. Now, you can buy these things. If you buy, you can spend up to $200 on a sieve like this if it's, you know, a professional science kind of thing. But you can also get them online for, you know, much cheaper than that. You want to make sure though that everything is stainless steel, or at least steel. And notice that the screen is hefty. It's not window screen, you know, it's nice, thick, solid material. And you don't want anything thinner than that. So if you don't want to buy a screen, you can also go online and you can just buy stainless steel mesh. You can say, I want number 12 or number 10, excuse me, stainless steel mesh, and you can buy a sheet of it and make your own sieve if you want. Okay, so I just happen to have this. The number 10 works really well for me, so that's what I'm going to use. So to use this thing, we're going to need some boards here. We're going to use our cookie sheet here. We've got to straddle that cookie sheet with this little structure that's going to support the sieve, so I don't have to hold the sieve. Okay, and so that's what we're looking for right there. Now, I'm going to put this on as a good example. Now I'm going to take it off so I can talk through it. Anywhere between 250 and 300 is good. 250 seems to be just fine. And if you look at it, you know, it's nice and creamy, kind of like chocolate pudding. And periodically, while this thing is warming up, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to do this. I'm going to scrape the sides. I'm going to try to blend it real well. This unit sends heat from the bottom and the sides. So right in the middle here, in the core, is going to be the coldest part of the melt. So periodically, I want to stir that around so that it's equally hot. Now, I have been in a hurry at times, and I've cranked it way up to 450 degrees briefly just to get it going faster. And I noticed that if I leave it on a high heat for too long, or even if I leave it on 250 or 300 degrees for too long, like overnight, the oil will start to separate from the clay. And you'll end up with a lot of the mineral oil kind of floating on the surface of the clay. Now, that's not a problem, but it just is a little more time consuming because you have to stir it in to make sure that you got good connection or good saturation of the clay and the oil. And so this stuff looks real good right now. And what I've decided, because I'm using this 10 by 15 pan here, and you have to decide what you're going to use. You could use deep dish pans. You could use cupcake sheets, whatever it is you're going to cast. But you need to determine how many scoops with what tool, how many scoops it takes to fill this container. And I've determined that with this viscosity of clay, this sieve, and this cookie sheet, it's going to take 14 scoops of the sieve, of the spatula, to give me what I need. And so I'm going to be counting those out, and we will or will not record all 14 of these, but we'll get to the end of it. So this is one. Now on the spatula, you want to use a regular cooking spatula. You want to allow it to have flex like that. That's two. And it's just pushing through that sieve really nicely. Now as I do this, I can see the debris, I can see the trash that's on top of the sieve. You may not be able to see it, it's small pieces. But it's there and it's filtering out. You know, with that 1/16 hole, you're really not allowing. See this stuff right here? There's trash, that's trash. And you can just take and get rid of that if you need to. Yesterday when I did some, I had a couple of nuts and bolts fall out. And so that was something that I took out right away. But most of this stuff is going pretty well. And I lost count, so I don't know where I am. So I'm going to just do 2 more, and we're going to say that's 14. All right, here's the last one. All right, now, assuming that's the last one, what I want to do now is I'm going to bang this sieve a little bit, like this. And that cleaned a lot of the debris, a lot of the clay out of the sieve. I'm going to put this here. And now all I want to do is just move this to the corners. I guess it's like brownies or something. Move it to the corners and the sides. Like that. And then all I'm going to do is vibrate it. Like that. And that's that. Okay? And then I'll be putting this down. Now this particular cookie sheet, that's about 5 pounds of clay. So, you know, I've got 2,000 pounds to do, so it's 5 pounds at a time. So it takes a little bit of time. So I would continue. I'm ready to put the clay into the melty thing. What do you call those things? Ovens. And if I see some obvious stuff like this, chunks of plaster, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of them just because I know that they're a piece of debris that are going to end up on top of my sieve, and I don't need that. I'm going to get rid of these mouse turds here. I'm going to dust off the sawdust that I can see, just anything like that. But I'm not really worried about cleaning it too much because I know that the sieve is going to take care of everything. But if I see something obvious, you know, like the skeleton of a rat or something, I will pull that out. So now that's clean enough to put in here, and so I'm going to take this nasty toxic clay and put it in the melter. And this thing will hold about 35 pounds of clay. And if you, you know, you can always add to it if something didn't fit. After it melts down, you can put some more in there. And we'll just leave that in there for now. You get the idea. So I'm going to leave the cover on there, and then I'm going to turn this to 250 degrees or 275 or 300. It doesn't really matter, but in 250 to 300 degree range is appropriate. I've got the fan blowing across it, so I'm not breathing all this chemistry in my lungs. And I'm going to monitor this. I'm not going to leave the house with this thing on. I'm not going to leave it on overnight. You know, I'm going to be responsible and make sure, you know, I've got something flammable cooking on my back porch, so I want to make sure that that's safe. And it should be fine. Now the next critical stage is to clean this sieve, because this clay is going to be cold. It's going to be real hard for us to use this again unless we carefully scrape all the debris off of it. And this is the bad side. This is where the trash is. And so I'm going to throw that away. Now this particular sieve is kind of cool because the mesh comes out of it. A lot of times these sieves, the mesh is soldered in or crimped in, and for whatever reason this actually comes out, which I find it makes it a lot easier for me to clean it. So I can clean this ring separately, but I won't do that now. This was the bad side. See the trash there, here and there. And so I'll just scrape as much of that as I can off of there. It goes into the trash, and I don't ever consider reusing that. This is the good side. This is what would go into the pan there. And so I'll clean as much of this off as I can. And I'll go ahead and reuse that. There's no reason why that ounce of clay can't be used. Okay, so that's pretty much scraped off as much as it's going to be, but it's still a lot of clay in all those spaces. So in order to clean that, I'm going to have to burn that off. Okay, so what I've got here is I've got a little aluminum pot with some water in it. I've got a little grill I'm going to set over top of it. On top of that, I'm going to put the sieve that I want to clean, and then I'm just going to light it on fire with this propane torch and let that wax burn off. And what's going to happen is the oils in the wax, the oils in the clay are going to ignite, burn off, just leaving clay, residual clay. Now I've got to use this torch on there long enough for the clay to actually ignite. So it takes a moment. Again, don't do this in your kitchen. Starting to ignite now. Started, and it will take care of itself. There. Now that might take a couple of minutes for that flame to go out. When that flame finally goes out, all the oil in the clay has been consumed, and there'll just be kind of clay dust on that screen. And like I say, this process takes just a couple of minutes. You want to go ahead and... All right, so it may have taken 3 or 4 minutes for that all that oil to burn off that clay. And this is probably still warm, but you see all that residual stuff, that's just all dusty clay. And I can knock most of that off. And now I can just take this to the sink and wash that off, and it's going to make a real nice clean screen again. I'll do that. You know, I'm just going to get dirty again. So this only took a couple of minutes to clean this sieve completely, and it'll be ready for the next batch of clay that we melt and recycle into those baking pans. There's a little bit right there that didn't melt, but we can get it. Or not worry about it. So anyway, there, clean screen, ready to go again. I'll put my finger over it so you don't see it. There you go.